Everybody. Richard. Bad boy. Okay, we are heading to the finish line for the session, but not for the committee's work. So this session is collaborations, training, and final thoughts.
All right, so what we wanted to do is before we get started, we brought up Andrew Kraft. He's a member of the Systematic Review Working Group. Again, this is the group that works on method development, and he's really been engaged in trying to sort of think about operationalizing systematic review consistently across the program. So we just wanted to give him an opportunity to have some remarks to these yes/no questions that came up yesterday.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in before Tina brings the thunder. So Dr. Salmon, you asked a number of questions about kind of our kind of basic systematic review practices and how we're applying them within IRIS. And you asked a number of yes/no questions, and we kind of gave answers that were more wobbly than I think we would have liked to have given. So I think I would give an emphatic no to the answer to all those questions. Are these final? And I think it's a very emphatic no. They're not final, but they are very stable in our opinion. Right? So we do think they're stable, and we are going to learn as the field evolves and as our understanding of how to apply these things to our specific needs evolves. For example, through testing in a variety of different types of assessments. So we've only tried it out in kind of the assessments we're doing now, but there's a lot of different types of assessments coming down the pike. And as we apply these approaches in those different databases, I think we're going to learn things that might tweak our approaches. And the field's evolving too. There's a lot of changing understanding of how to handle, for example, biological plausibility that I think we're going to learn as we go. But I just wanted to speak, I wanted to speak more specifically on also this individual study evaluations in particular. I think maybe we didn't give enough detail there about how we're evolving there. And so we're really working on our capacity building for how to handle specific outcomes during study evaluation. So we have a number of things that we always look for to trigger within each of those domains, right? But for each outcome, how those questions are answered differs, right? Depending on outcome. And so we're trying to build up these databases of knowledge on particular outcomes that come up in our assessments. And we realize that and recognize that we don't live in a bubble. We're not the only experts within EPA on these different topics. And I wanted to point out NHERL in particular is a group that we've been collaborating a lot with. That's our National Health Effects Research Laboratory. And I want to give 3 specific examples when we reached out to experts on particular outcomes where we didn't have enough in-house expertise to really fully evaluate those individual studies on those health outcomes. One would be Charles Wood. He's a PhD and a DVM and a certified veterinary pathologist in NHERL. And we've actually reached out to him to discuss how we evaluate histopathology in our studies. Second would be Mary Gilbert. She's a renowned expert in thyroid hormone. And so we've reached out to her when we've had questions about how to evaluate thyroid hormone analyses in animal studies. And the third would be Ginger Moser. She's also an NHERL, and she's an expert in neurobehavioral studies and study design. And we reached out to her when we had particular, very specific questions about how to analyze different types of neurobehavioral assays in animals. So we are, reaching out to our other experts within EPA. We've recognized we don't have all the expertise we need. And for epidemiology, we gave the example when we reached out to those asthma experts. And we're building this repertoire of knowledge about different outcomes when they arise. What are the key things that we need to make sure we're asking of the studies before we conduct these evaluations, and to include that and apply those consistently across the sets of studies within the assessments. So just wanted to clarify that. Say stable, not final.
So let me ask, I'm sorry, I don't want to do this for very long. Since you're redefining yes and no, does stable mean operational?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
I heard yes. Is that does yes and yes mean yes?
Yes.
So yes.
They are being implemented, and we are successfully implementing them, yes.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, all right.
Okay, back to...
Okay, and I just had two clarifications as well. So in terms of some of this discussion that happened in the last session about when do you reveal which particular strategy you're going to use to do the dose response, so it may be the case where we can outline considerations in the protocol, but in other cases, it's really sort of a more mature decision that you make in the assessment. And so for arsenic, which is obviously not a new start for us, it's a very mature assessment. As we've reviewed it internally, we're going to be sort of sharing a protocol. Obviously we're starting from scratch because it's very mature, but in that protocol, it will outline sort of the choices that we're making in terms of how we're going to do the dose response. So that's one of the ways, is that when we're there.
And how you're focused.
Right, when you can't always a priori outline it, but when you know it, we can sort of envision that as a protocol update. And so that's something, in particular in arsenic, this protocol, we've been thinking about some of the NRC recommendations for suggested analyses. Well, honestly, the team has tried many of them, and in some cases, they weren't actually informative. So in this protocol, it will indicate that we tried this, wasn't informative, so that's what I mean by off-ramping. So in something that's that complicated, you get to a point where you want to declutter the actual assessment of things that you tried and explored. So, and again, because it's arsenic, and that will be a public science session where we would reveal that protocol. Also, and this is something we sort of covered yesterday when you were asking about, none of these public examples actually showcase an aggressive targeting of health outcome, for example. You raised that question, and I said that we were working on some internally, but you're right, none of the ones that we've developed over the past 6 months show that, and in part because it really is, it's a big change from everything to very targeted, and what we're doing is we're taking the time to try to get the agency input on that. I mean, there's a lot of sort of confidence or comfort raising that we have to do within the agency before we share those. But we have a couple of what I would say would be pretty bold targeting in the work.
Some of which we alluded to over the past 2 days, but the difficulty is that the risk manager, who's the client for the product, has to be comfortable that they can use it defensively. And that narrowing of the scope and the focus does not undermine their ability, especially in a litigious environment, to be able to use that information. Hence the IRIS gold standard inheritance. So and we've done a number of briefings recently in Washington about this, is how do you successfully model a portfolio approach that still meets the gold standard of acceptability? It's narrow in focus, it's productively delivered, it's not comprehensive, and yet it's still a gold standard. So we're trying to decipher from our risk management community what are the elements of gold standard that are absolutely critical that we must maintain in our portfolio approach. So this public engagement, this constant opening for input through the processes, very rigorous peer review, those are the elements, but nowhere did it say that if you narrow or specify the focus of a study, do you diminish the veneer of the gold, that it goes from 18 to 12 karat suddenly with no nickel in it. But, so that's where we are.
Okay. All right. So, but we only have a few slides actually in the session.
Thankfully.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about training and collaboration. So this sort of gets at some of the issues we've talked about, sort of, how are you operationalizing this and sort of consistently within the program? So what we've done is hold training sessions for Irish program staff in 2017. They might range from demos on software to seminars to retreats. And if you've done a lot of this work, especially the more expert judgment phases, risk of bias, evidence profile tables, then it's not a one and done training, right? So some of these retreats would be, for example, we held one where we had teams who were working on real live assessments, prepared to have sort of their risk of bias analyses done so that we could actually begin to apply structured frameworks for confidence. That was like the day activity, and they broke up in little groups, they reported back. And so we envisioned doing more of these to sort of help foster that consistency across the program. As I mentioned, we've developed support teams to help teach and provide assistance. So, as we think about doing more, or the same with fewer resources, it changes the model of how you get teams to work together. And so, for example, we have like a team of people who, if a team needs help screening or doing risk of bias assessment, they're willing to step in, sort of when the chemical assessment team needs them. We also have active engagement with the EPA Systematic Review Communities of Practice. This is Emma Lavoie and Kristin Markey and Jennifer Nichols. They sort of really help organize that. That's a new communities of practice that was developed in the past year. And it's been very engaging. I think we were sort of pleasantly surprised at how much interest across the agency there was in systematic review, not just in human health, but also thinking about ecological questions, exposure questions, and how surprisingly quick this sort of PICO criteria really picked up. Everybody sort of knows what it means now. So through this communities of practice, what we're doing is sort of surveying where people are at in interest level, where they're at in applying systematic review, and then trying to sort of target areas where the agency says, we need more here. So we've been hearing about, go ahead.
I was going to ask you to also elaborate a little bit about engagement with the journals and how you're hoping this will inform how data are reported in the journals to make it easier to use in risk assessment.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So this would be actually sort of derived from the Hawk presentation where you saw sort of this structured data entry. And then we discussed that trying to electronically capture that information from PDFs is hard, will probably never not be completely feasible. And so we've been trying to sort of use those approaches to sort of, what if we flip the model? What if authors could enter in a structured format key features that we always summarize of methods and results? Then that might be one way that we can sort of, it impacts the publishing model, but it would be a way that would really facilitate the timeliness of being able to sort of translate published finding into decision making. So then, let's see. So we've been doing a lot of engagement with external stakeholders, other agency offices. So that could be things from working with sort of states, academic units, industry stakeholders, who there's a lot of interest in the tools. And so a lot of that is sort of just introducing people on how to use the tools. Again, what we'd like to do is really, to use your word, democratize the process.
Yes. Very critical.
Yeah, so that's been very engaging. We have MOUs with NTP, NIOSH, ATSDR, WHO. Through those MOUs, the one with NTP is new this past year. And what we've been doing, you heard Andrew talk about how there's a need when you're doing risk of bias to come up with sort of specific outcome considerations or exposure considerations. So NTP has a very similar process for how they develop theirs, engaging experts, applying it, piloting. So we're trying to be in touch with those so that we can take advantage of these sort of more considerations that get developed along the way. We also have plans to sort of share more with the grade working group. So I mentioned, I think we're at the point now where we feel like we've absorbed a lot of the existing best practices in systematic review, but now we're working into new realms, and we're trying to engage the broader systematic review community. So, for example, we co-organized a workshop with GRADE and NTP about thinking about GRADE, which is structured frameworks, applying it to modeled evidence. We also have, there's a GRADE working group now that we're engaged in that's coming up with transparency guidance when you're dealing with rapid response and you don't have time to do a systematic review. So we're extensively trying to keep engaged with that community. And then I mentioned that we have a few academic MOUs that we're in the process of creating. And this is, again, really to sort of help to find students, embed them within IRIS teams, and then give them experience of using systematic review principles on chemical assessments. And then I think obviously there's a lot that they gain from that process. And I would argue that, even if these students don't go into literature analysis as a profession, I think you can't help but do systematic review work and become a better investigator. Because it really, you have a better appreciation for how you should write studies, how you should conduct studies, when you have a knowledge of how they're utilized. Oops. And then international collaborations, I've touched on this a bit through the MOUs, through the collaborations with GRADE. But I think that, another example would be that we have Anna Bronius from CIRAP coming over in the next month or so. I mentioned that within the agency, there's a lot of questions about certain aspects of systematic review. One particular question is oh, I hear about this tool and this tool and this tool for bias assessment. How are they different? How are they the same? So what we're trying to do is sort of bring folks who've developed other tools to the agency so we can have some hands-on experience applying different tools to the same studies. And there, I think that we'll find is that when those tools are essentially looking at the same underlying content, then they will probably perform similarly. So we're doing a lot of that kind of work. We're also exploring opportunities with EFSA. So EFSA is, I would consider, an early adopter in trying to apply systematic review to a variety of assessments, the portfolio approach. They're very interested in quantitating at the realms of evidence integration and uncertainties. So if the logistics work out, we're hoping to sort of export lean in for a short period of time to Italy and work with them. So again, trying to build these strong relationships internationally.
We're embedding a lot of people inside NCIA and from NCIA outside to encourage this constant cross flow of knowledge.
And I think that was all I had. And then I'll turn it over.
Well, I don't have too much to add, but that doesn't stop me. I actually just want to thank the committee and just make a few sort of additional closing remarks just so that it helps bring the information together. But when we originally envisioned this workshop, we were hoping that we would be in a position to actually give you more final assessments to look at as well as to inform this process. But getting acclimated with a new administration, including new leadership in the Office of Research and Development, everything just took a while to really pick up. And really in the last week, suddenly we developed a pipeline and a relationship that is allowing us now to get things done, and we're probably not surprised that suddenly we were able to get 3 or 4 documents out in the past 4 days. So hopefully this calendar year forward will be filled with a lot of exciting new products. But in the process, as we're doing sort of house cleaning and really realigning with this full vision that Chris has brought really with her, and I can't possibly describe the credit that goes to Chris for having brought this, not just the knowledge, but the energy and compassion that's required to create this level of disruption. You can imagine for the scientists that you met from NCIA in the room, and many who are on the phone and on video listening, this has not been easy. We have wholesale taken work that was completed out of their hands and handed it over to a different part of the agency. And they may or may not get any credit for the work, but they really, to them, the mission of the agency is that critical, that they kissed the product and gave it over. There are assessments that were 80% done that we are completely remapping, not because they were not excellent, but they would not excellently describe the work that's been implemented over the past year. Those same scientists rolled up their sleeves, and they're developing a protocol on arsenic, which has been their life's work. But they're willing to do this with Chris because it is that important to them to adhere to the model that Chris has implemented. And because she has rolled up her sleeve and sat down on the carpet with them and done what it takes to really do this. There's no way for us to provide that evidence except for the interactions that you've had. And then Jessica alluded to the 2 products that the CAC most recently reviewed. That's an example of at some point when we came in January, it was too late to pull everything back. That would have been just impossibly disruptive. And to do it at that early point before relationships and trust were built across NCIA would have just paralyzed the organization. So we took the bullet, we went out with those products that did not fully adopt all the recommendations of NRC. We acknowledged that to the CAC. We acknowledge that to the community. We hope through the public comment process to be able to address some of the issues. We won't be able to address all of the issues. We won't be able to address all the controversy, but we will find a way to strengthen those documents. The authors of the documents are committed to doing that, and so are we. And then moving forward, as we learned even from this discourse, even before your report comes out, and you can't imagine, we're dying to see your report, but even the discourse has been very informative. The poster session was extremely informative to us. We will run back after Chris allows us to have a lunch break. We'll run back, and we are going to right away begin to make a lot of the other improvements that we heard from across the community and from you as well. So we are very excited. We will be coming back to you over this calendar year and throughout the process, every step of the way, improving our processes and our approaches. And the science improvements, what you heard in session 4 today, those are, some of them are in the research domain, but many of them are mature enough, and we will beg the community's forgiveness as we apply them, as we apply our logic for applying them. Some of them will do them through peer review manuscripts first to feel it out before we implement them, but we will implement them. This is the direction that risk assessment is going. This is what we've heard from the community, and we're committed to fully implementing them. So with that, we look forward really to the report. We're extremely grateful to you for this incredibly crazy time frame that you've committed to. Thank you. And we hope to come back to you with some gorgeous products soon, and hopefully one of the first ones will be the formaldehyde if we're successful.
Great.
Oh, and Andrew wants me to go through the slides, so I'll. It just reiterates the highlights. Do you want to?
Tina likes to go off book.
Yeah, if you think there are more highlights from that, but that was mostly done for the committee, so you could see how we mapped our understanding. You can tell I don't do agendas and stuff like that. It's cultural. It's cultural. So anyway. If you're satisfied that the slide deck provides our mapping, I think it's there. If you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer them.